There are agencies that will advertise an hourly rate which will be inclusive of holiday pay. Now, this being brought back in can therefore be misleading. So when people will take a position thinking they're earning £15 an hour and then realize that that's been inclusive of the holiday pay. So when they go to take holiday, they've got nothing more coming. If you know anybody that's taking positions on a temporary basis, that if you are taking temporaries on yourself within your business, that the agency working on your behalf has made this explicitly clear that the hourly rate, if they are advertising as a rolled up amount, is indeed a rolled up amount and not separate. For weekly payrolls, how should tax years with a week 53 be handling when payrolling a benefit?
In the same way as anything else.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast, the show that explores the latest insights and innovations in the world of payroll.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to February's edition of Payroll Question Time. We're going to be talking about holiday pay, accrual, rolled up, and recruitment. Big topic here, always is, even when it isn't changing. But we're going to be sort of unpicking that as we go through. HMRC updates, a name and shame list, salary sacrifice, again, a popular subject on today's show. Minimum wage rises, of course. New employment rights coming from April, so obviously better to prepare for those now, so stay tuned for that. Payroll benefits mandation, again, act now. This is a really important episode, so please do stay tuned right until the end. It'll allow you to really ensure you've got everything you need to run an effective payroll from April onwards. RPA and AI, this is the considerations for a digital age. What did we expect to come in? How's it manifested itself in the current world? And is it, should we expect more things to come as we go through as well? And it's a bit of a then and now reflection on the past decade. So we're going to give a few updates from the SD Works Academy. There'll be a chance for hot topics, we hope, at the end. And of course, we'll be asking your questions as we go through. So we're going to jump into holiday pay. After holiday pay, I will get to the questions. We're going to run our first poll at that point. So that'll be a great opportunity for me to ask all of your questions. So do stay tuned. I haven't forgotten them. They're going to be asking those in just a moment. But let's crack on with holiday pay, accrual and rolled up. Simon, what do we need to know?
Okay, well, thanks for that, Nick. The guidance from the Department for Business and Trade was issued on the 1st of January, so not that many weeks ago, which outlined the changes to regulations, to the working time regulations, to employees who are considered to be irregular or part-year workers. And irregular and part-year workers are those that may be in a period of employment but have periods where they're not paid, or the pay varies significantly or wholly or mostly varies. So there is a little bit of interpretive in the legislation. And it's bringing in a new method of options for employers to apply. Many may recognize those as being something we used to have in the past. However, I suggest that they are subtly different. They're not the same. So you'll find 12.07% banded around, but it's not the same. So there is a new option for irregular and part-year workers to pay them as a choice. You can stay as you are with 5.6 weeks, 52 weeks average earnings, or you can go to a new method, which is all working hours. That's every hour that's worked, 12.07%. Or a percentage which may be higher if your entitlements are generally higher. So if you had 6 weeks entitlement as an organisation, it would be a high percentage. To put that aside with rounding, which is quite strange. Half hour is rounded up, under half hour can be rounded down, and putting that aside for accrual to be paid at a later point. When it is paid, the payment is based on the 52-week average of earnings. That's and that average is based on 52 weeks pay accumulated over the period divided by 52 weeks of hours over the period, or up to, if there's less, dividing that's your hourly rate. You pay the holiday on their accrued balance on that basis. Now, that will be different from many people have understood in the past, because quite often 1207 was only on basic hours, not all hours, and often the holiday pay was based on basic rate, not the total pay divided by hours worked, and so a very different basis. The other option is for rolled up holiday, which is where you actually make a 12.07% top up on their pay each period, and you don't have to worry about holiday leave or pay when it's actually taken because they've already had the money. And again, that only applies to regular and part years. If they're regular workers, in other words, they get a salary or get some money every period, doesn't count. And even short-term contracts, it wouldn't count either. They'd still form under the old rules. The difference with the new is that there is no 4-week or 20-day test. The new rules will apply to the whole duration of the holiday. And so it's 12.07% of all hours and 12.07% of all earnings under the rolled up holiday process, not just their basic. So very different. And equally, there are two protections that come into play. And that, even if they're not scheduled to work, I'd kind of put in as a caveat in the fact that they're entitled to those for periods of sickness and statutory parental leave. So if you didn't schedule them in for next week to work, so you wouldn't normally have paid or accrued holiday, and they turn up with a doctor's note, check out the details, you may find that actually you still have to accrue time or pay them based on a 52-week average of hours for accrual or 52 weeks of earnings for those with rolled up holiday for periods of sickness and statutory, which wouldn't have existed under prior, if I dare to say, unlawful practices according to the Supreme Court that occurred before. So it is subtly different. Karen may want to put a twist on that as well, I guess, Nick. Is that enough for the moment?
Yeah, Karen, I saw you nodding away as Simon was speaking. So anything you'd like to add?
Well, I can't obviously at the end of the day agree entirely with the legislation. It is what it is. I think there's just one thing that springs to mind. I love Harry Potter movies, and Dumbledore's renowned for saying things. And for me, when I was really excited for this coming out, and I thought simplification, but as Dumbledore would say, alas, it was just not to be. So I'm afraid I agree with everything with Simon, but I think it's very important in a serious message, really look at these new rules because they are different. And the other thing perhaps to mention is these new rules, yes, they apply to irregular hours workers and part year workers, but only for leave years that apply from the 1st of April 2024. So if your leave year is January to December, this actually wouldn't apply to you until January 2025. So also bear that in mind, look at your leave years. It'll be interesting, I think, over time to see what employers do with this, because the guidance, unfortunately, also makes clear it is just that, and that employers should seek legal advice and independent professional advice. So we're also watching this space to see what the employment lawyers and advisors might be advising here. But the difference as well is we've had a lot of case law that's decided what employers will or won't do, but part of this is legislation for the UK, and part of it seems to be based on case law. So, yeah, complex still, yes.
Yes.
A chance for employment lawyers to make a few extra quid due to a bit of a lack of clarity then, by the sounds of things. Simon, you're going to add a point.
Yeah, the other angle, which is within the guidance, because as Karen's correct, we used to get this with the old national insurance stuff years and years ago. You'd get all this guidance for government, and then it'd tell you that, but in reality, this has got no basis for anything. And we still get that very much from the Department for Business and Trade, is they'll put out guidance on how they think the law should apply, and then tells you that you can't rely on that at all, which is strange. But the other aspect, it does hint to employers, because I'm seeing it in social media. I don't know about you, Nick and Karen, is some people are deciding to change their leave year to the 1st of April arbitrarily. The guidance does remind employers that to make a change, you may need to consult employees and notify them. So it's not just something you can arbitrarily do.
I think there's another point I want to raise as well. You've got the word recruitment here in the second bullet point for those watching. Now, this may not impact everybody unless you're potentially seeking opportunities. I guess this is more of an opportunity for me to protect anyone that may be seeking temporary work if you're in that payroll sphere, but also if you're looking for temporary resource within your business. It can be a little bit unscrupulous from recruitment agencies. So there are agencies that will advertise an hourly rate which will be inclusive of holiday pay. Now, this being brought back in can therefore be misleading. So when people will take a position thinking they're earning £15 an hour, let's say, pick an arbitrary number, and then realize that that's been inclusive of their holiday pay. So when they go to take holiday, they've got nothing more coming. It's really important that if you know anybody that's taking positions on a temporary basis, that if you are taking temporaries on yourself within your business, that the agency working on your behalf has made this explicitly clear that the hourly rate, if they are advertising as a rolled up amount, is indeed a rolled up amount and not separate. And it's something that I think is one of the reasons legislation was brought in initially, probably to protect temporary workers from things like this before we brought it back. But certainly when I started in recruitment many years ago, when I started on a temporary desk, this was something a lot of other agencies did to try and win the war for talent. They would advertise roles at really inflated hourly rates, because that's essentially what they are, because they're including the holiday pay in that calculation. So be really, really clear if you're working with anyone or if you see adverts on the temporary side, that you get that distinction from the agency that's advertising to make it really clear whether that's inclusive, of course, rolled up, or whether it's not. And of course, that may well be dependent on the arbitrary rules that Simon's just been discussing when the end year is, of course. So again, if you are looking for temporary resource and you're unable to offer this because your end of year doesn't coincide with the legislation we're talking about right now, maybe it is December, as Karen said, then you need to make sure that your agency is accurately reflecting how you can pay your temps as well. Because if I took a position on right now, I wouldn't be able to advertise it as a rolled up rate because legislation isn't in yet. And if the end of year for that client was December, as Karen mentioned, I would still be unable to do so. So really important that we get those clarifications made out from the outset. So I don't want to add anything to that, Simon.
Well, I'm seeing some conversations saying that people will just increase the basic rate to include the 1207. And that's expressly not allowed by the regulations. If you are paying rolled up rate, it has to be paid separately. And the other impact, and I'm sure we'll go on to talk about a number of areas because there's been a rather large list published, is of course the rolled up addition doesn't count towards minimum wage either. But just
of course, neither should it. Absolutely right.
Yeah, and another thought that came to mind, Nick, on your recruitment is in some instance we're seeing that sometimes those hourly rates are inclusive of employers' national insurance, employers' pension contributions. So actually, you can appear like you're going to earn quite an inflated rate, but that includes
anyone doing that. That's just dastardly completely, in my view. If it helps, if we advertise anything, it's only the hourly rate. It's never rolled up and it's never included. But I can't speak for other recruiters, so that would be really dastardly to include the pensions piece and the employers' NI as well. Oh my God, I don't even I've seen that. We've had a question come in, and it does relate to holiday pay. So I'm going to ask it now before we get to the first poll. Diane has asked, does a term timer count as part of a year worker?
It depends. Yeah. You've got a thought, Karen. You go.
I was going to say, so it might not. So if I can just use a typical example. So in the Brazil case, which is what this has still come out of, don't forget, is that this lady was a music teacher and she worked term time, but when she was not at work, she did not receive pay. So that's the first point. So if we then use a typical example here in the UK of a school as an example, term time workers tend to have an annual salary divided by 12. So whether they're in work or they're not in work, they receive a 12th of their pay each month. In that case, they would not qualify under this legislation as a part-year worker. Part-year workers are where when they are not at work, they do not get paid. Would you agree with that, Simon?
Exactly. So they're still under a contract of employment with the employer, but they have a week where they receive nothing. And you're right. You could argue, well, these others that get a salary and divided in 12s have really, because we've spread out pay from other times, the guidance, the regulations are clear. They're not part-year workers because you paid them.
Right.
Sort of throws fairness a bit in the face. really.
Yes. And you could say if I'm employed from beginning of a term to the end of a term then, and my contract ends, am I a part-year worker? The answer again would be no, because you haven't had a week or more where you've been employed but unpaid. You've only been paid for the weeks you worked, in which case you're a regular worker. Therefore, the new rules apply. The old rules, I should say. The new rules don't apply.
We've had one more question on this. I'm just going to, again, it relates to the same as the last question really, is how should we accrue holiday pay for term timers when they're on maternity leave?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, do they qualify for the accrual basis is the first answer. And the answer may be no, in which case they're entitled to 5.6 weeks. Basis, yes, annualized accrual only applies to first year of employment if they're a term time worker. Now, if they're a regular or part year worker where you have periods where they're not paid, if they were working and it would apply, then during those periods of statutory parental pay, you'd be required to accrue 12.07. Or with schools, entitlements are usually higher. So you might be a 6 weeks entitlement or a 6.8 weeks entitlement, in which case the percentage would be higher. And there are examples of that in the DBT guidance where it is higher. You'd be required to do that on the 52-week average hours over the past period of time, excluding 0 hours weeks.
Okay, fab. And last one before we move on to our first poll. By the way, there are no such thing as a silly question. For anyone that's concerned about putting anything in the question box, so do put them in. It's better that you know and you get it accurate, timely and compliant than you don't know and get it wrong. But there's a question that's coming here. If you have full-time employees or part-time employees with a holiday allowance, paid a salary, holiday pay only occurs if the minimum 20 allowance at leave date is not used. I assume this scenario is not impacted by rolled up holiday. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. Let's try and unpick that a little bit. So ordinarily, if you're not a regular or rolled up holiday, there might be what some people call Euro pay for the first 20 days or 4 weeks, but you still get an extra 1.6 weeks entitlement. Yeah. So 5.6 weeks entitlement a year. That can include paid bank holidays, although there is no right to paid bank holidays, in which case that holiday would be other days. The 52-week average earnings may be considered by an employer to only apply to the first 4 weeks. However, the DBT guidance is you need to be able to justify to your employees why you would do that. And I guess the question there is only because the courts have never ruled on the Regulation 13A entitlements. The courts have only ruled on the EU. That doesn't mean that the same principle doesn't apply, because I think they both refer to the Employment Rights Act on average holiday pay is a view. So you may find that one day they may be challenged in the court, but the new regulations make no distinction. So the new regulations apply to all hours for all of it, and rolled up holiday for all of it. So there is no distinction between 20, 28 days or 4 weeks and 5.6 weeks entitlement. They're treated all the same. So just be aware of that. So it's only the current rules being applied that have a 4-week potential distinction. But I tend to say most employers don't just do the 4 weeks. They do the same basis for all of the holiday.
Great. Well, let's see what our audience think of this change then. Let's jump to our first poll of the day. The first poll is, what is the impact of rolled up holiday pay legislation on your business? There are 3 options here for those in audio only. First option is positive. Second option is negative, and the third option is not sure. So what is the impact of rolled up holiday pay legislation on your business? Now, while we're getting those poll results, we have had a lot of questions come into our questions box. Thank you, participants, for giving us all of your questions for our panel. I'm going to start with this one, comes in from Tony. It says, now, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this. Let's have a look. It says, we have several Turkish employees who have net pay contracts, i.e., they expect the same net pay each month, irrespective of tax codes, promotions, and starting dates within a tax year. can our system show dynamic pay slips, which will enable us to home in on the net pay expected by changing the gross pay salaries? If so, how can this be done? If not, then is there another solution somewhere in the payroll process? I have to assume he's probably using an SD Works solution would be my guess if it's coming in for you, Simon.
Okay, if it's coming the SD Works solution way, the SD Works solution has what they call net to gross capability. So it'll actually gross up the payment for you. You can see that on the open periods. You just put in a value of the net pay. It will tell you what the calc is, change any of the associated items, and it will do a dynamic calculation, which you'll see within minutes. So in effect, you adjust the data, apply it, or say that's what you want to do, it will give you a result. So generally in SD Works world, that's something called net to gross. Other systems may offer gross up. Some payroll solutions won't offer the capability because it's fairly complex calculation. But the SD Works solution will gross up your tax and NI liabilities, because when you meet the pecuniary liability of the employee in such a method, the amount you're meeting is also subject to tax and NI. So it goes into a circular calculation of increasing until it can't increase anymore. With tax, that's fairly easy because taxable gross value is always truncated to £1. Tables, it's slightly more forgiving because that's truncated to various points, but exact percentage, it'll go round even further, because it gets down to the fact of when a penny won't change.
Okay, super. We've had a question that comes in related to holiday pay, so I'm going to ask this now. For years, we've been paying average holiday for employees. We only pay it for 20 days, though. Is that correct?
I'm going to say it's not incorrect. However, the DBT do put out guidance that an employer should explain to their employees the basis of how they do it. And the reason being is that the averaging rules related to Regulation 13, what I'm meaning is the court judgments, because they were European-based court judgments, and the European courts won't consider Regulation 13A because that's an additional entitlement under British law or UK law. So is it correct? I think it's not incorrect. Is that not the same thing, if you know what I mean? I don't know what Karen's view there is, but there's an element of you could be challenged.
I would agree. You could be challenged, but of course, don't forget under the new rules, if they fall into the categories of irregular hours or part-year workers, then you will have to base it on the 5.6 weeks or the 28 days. Correct. Yeah, so I agree with Simon. It's not incorrect, but I say it's most common employers will base it on the UK simply from an admin burden perspective.
Yes. The oddity about this one, Nick, is the European court rulings only consider Regulation 13, but the averaging rule is the same under the Employment Rights Act, but they don't consider it for the Regulation 13A because it's not a European matter.
Well, we've got 4 more questions I'm going to ask, but let's see the results of this poll first, and then we'll go through those questions before we open the next part of the show. So what is the impact of rolled up holiday pay legislation on your business? For those in audio only, we have 24% think it's positive, 6% say negative, and 70% say not sure. Karen, I wonder if you could let me know what your thoughts are on those results.
Yeah, I appreciate the not sure, simply because I think with the guidance only being published on the 1st of January, where most would have been enjoying hogmanay and recovering from, then I think it's only now that employers are starting to, first of all, decide, does this apply to me? Then, of course, they'll be looking at, okay, what do we need to do? They might be seeking advice. So at the moment, unless the leave year starts in April and they have irregular workers and part-year workers, then I can understand that, a lot of people will be thinking, does this or doesn't apply to me? And if it does, what do I need to do? So I'm not surprised by that results.
Great, fantastic. Well, let's jump into the other questions then. If you can put the next slide on the screen so we know what's coming next. Dave, I'm just going to run through these questions as we go through. First one is
this. Make a comment about the negative.
Go on, yes, please do.
Nick, it's interesting that 6% have said a negative, and I probably could consider that, because there is an element of what is the negative impact of rolled up holiday, and that is the individual may never take holiday. They just get the money and work.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely. And we've seen that, a lot of people workaholics, particularly in the payroll community, let's be honest, we have to take enforced breaks at the best of times. So that's a really good point. Well made. Okay, so question here. We've got, when an employee starts payrolling benefits, will the employee be paying catch-up tax in the first year? Karen?
I'm going to say yes and no, only because is there a tax liability on the tax due that the items reported on P11D? Yes. Does HMRC reflect the fact that they're receiving benefits in kind at source, i.e. payrolling, from the start of the tax year, whatever it is? Yes, they do. So the employee is still liable for tax on all, but HMRC will adjust the tax codes, hence their date of the 6th of April for registering, and hence anybody in the payroll profession who does payrolling of benefits, we say December, so that the P9 run for the new tax codes for the start of the tax year are reflecting the change in the fact that benefits in kind are being processed through the payroll. Simon?
Yeah, I agree. It's absolutely a no change position, really, Nick. I think sometimes it's feared that they'll be paying twice, but under the P11D process, they are, because the tax is collected through the adjusted tax code. So they're impacted because they'll pay last year's debt because HMRC didn't know about it. They'll pay this year's debt because they do now know about it and they've reduced their tax code. And sometimes in the older days, it's not so much these days, because when you submit your P11D data in July, it's quite often reflected in August or September. Whereas if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't reflected until January or February. So quite often people were then impacted by 2 years of back tax collection. Last year, the current year, which only had a couple of months left, and they were getting coded for the next year. So it was almost like you were being hit by 3 years under the P11D process. With payrolling, you will get the catch up, because last year's that HMRC have just found about, they will collect. But if you've been P11D for a number of years and it's not a new benefit, they're already collected it. So when you payroll in a new year, what they do is, instead of knocking off, 1,200 quid for your medical insurance from your free pay or whatever it is, they've from your tax code, they put it back on. So it doesn't cause a double collection in the year. So I actually think it's very similar. The advantage of payrolling is it's collected real time, so it eliminates any shock, and any new employees won't get the end of year, July, August, September shock at all, because they'll be paying it from day one. So I think payrolling's positive, but I think Karen knew that. I was on the Office of Tax Simplification Committee that proposed payrolling actually being allowed, not from a compulsory basis, I would say. That's an HMRC invention. That was from a voluntary basis.
Yeah, and I too was involved. I think it was
this panel. Sorry, Karen.
I was going to say, back in 2005, I think, I'm also a member of the Admin Burdens Advisory Board, and I worked with HMRC because Ireland, as in the Republic of Ireland, have been doing payrolling of benefits for donkey's years. And I did research, and I recommended, along with that, and OTS were part of that as well, that we looked at payrolling of benefits. But like Simon, not necessarily mandating, or certainly not mandating at the speed and the way, but that's to come later.
Cool. Well, lots of more questions to get through, so I'm going to come back in. We've had a bit of an update on the last question regarding the Turkish employees. So just to make a mention here, I think it's a quick response, Simon. So I'm going to just run this out while we can. Your answer gives me hope, but we don't input the salary details. We send a spreadsheet to Glasgow, so we have had no training nor access to payslip input. Should we take this up with them? I'm suggesting they probably should, but I'm going to check it with you first.
Oh, sure. Well, if you're an SD Works customer and you want more information on how to handle those payments, we call ourselves the PALS team. So we're the Payroll, HR and Legal Services team. Email us. And the email is simply PALS, so pals at sdworks.com, and we can see. However, operating a net to gross capability may incur a little bit slightly higher fee because it's a complex specialist calculation, but is available in the solution for you.
Super.
So contact us at pals and we'll help.
Yeah. All done. I've written that privately to the question asker. So thank you for putting it in the question box. Right, next one. Employers had tax refunds over some months and not worked again. So account is now in credit. How can an employer claim this overpaid tax if the employee does not have tax to pay before the end of the tax year? Single employee in one payroll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Simon.
You need to make contact with HMRC and ask them to fund it back. They'll expect you generally to fund it by offsetting against future liabilities, but it doesn't sound as if you'll have one. So you'll need to make a claim for HMRC to fund it. Will they fund that by the end of the week? I doubt it very much. It may take some time to get that refund, but HMRC will refund eventually. Sometimes they might say they want to wait until the end of the year to understand the annual position. Karen may have experience as well dealing with small clients and things as well of what happens in those circumstances.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Simon's just said. It would be down to HMRC to do that unless you can. They may instruct you to do something unlikely by the EPS, but obviously you can't do it on the FBS if the employee's not there. But one thing that may be possible with your software is that you can defer all tax refunds until month 12. So now it's a client choice. It wouldn't be up to a bureau to make that decision. Obviously, it's an employer choice where, by turning that on, it means if you have got employees where earnings are fluctuating because they're 0 hours and they're working for multiple employers, that you can defer it so that in month 12, it does a catch up. And if a refund is due, it would pay it. Now, that again, it has to be seriously considered, and you would need to talk to your agent if you use one and or speak to your software supplier.
Great. Fab. Okay, question regarding pension contributions, please. We have missed 3 years of employers' contributions at 10.5% and only contributed 7.5% during this time, which means we need to pay a lump sum to the employee for the 3% difference over 3 years. How will I process this on the data template next month, please? I hope my question makes sense. Simon.
Well, yeah, this is where we could have probably done with Andy being on our panel. He's unfortunately unable to join us this month, but he will be back on future months. So we're reliant on our volunteers, aren't we, on the panel? But he's the pension regulator specialist. Karen and I know him well because he was a former CIPP tutor as well back in his days when he worked as payroll manager of Mercer's. But he works for the pension regulator, would give you a definitive view, but you wouldn't be paying it to the employee. You need to fund the pension with those missing amounts. And it's likely that I'd probably say contact the pension regulator help desk, because they may say that you have a liability to fund up the investment failure as well. So it may be that those 3% may have gained over the past 3 years a 30% increase in investment return. Oh, you're liable for that because you failed to pay your scheme rule contributions. If you did it in 2023, you might have been okay because the contribution investment return may well have been negative, or 22. But other years, it's likely to have been positive. So they may say you need to speak with the pension administrator and find out what the underfunding result is. But you wouldn't pay it to the employee. You need to top up their pension. That doesn't need anything in the returns to HMRC at all, because it's got nothing to do with them. That's really placing and making that payment on your pensions interface of under employer contributions. Don't know if you've got any thoughts there. But
I would agree. Pensions provider, because obviously that's where it goes. The only other thing I was going to say, and it's probably something to ask, is whether this was a relief at source or net. Because of course, if it was net and there is a a tax part to this. So where the individual, I'm just trying to think if it was a higher percentage that should have been, in theory, less tax might have been due, then that's when you'll also need to have a conversation with HMRC of how best to resolve that. But I think here the regulator is a good place to start, your pension provider, on how you would make these payments over, particularly because they'll be the only ones that will know the investment, unless the regulator can agree a standard for ease, which I do know that they can do. And then, of course, depending on the type of pension scheme, will then depend whether you need HMRC's guidance as well.
Yes, I think Andy, if it was here, would say the role of the regulator is to support you to get it right. Yes, so they would want you to see that you're taking action to correct it. But I think in the question, Nick, you indicated this was an employer contribution. If it was employee, Karen's comments
yes, 3 years of employee contribution. Yeah.
Yes, if it was employee, there'd be tax implications, possibly even national insurance, of salary sacrifice arrangements involved. It'd be much more complicated.
Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you exhausted of the war for talent cliche? The problem is, when we hear a cliche, it usually exists for a reason. However, we think it's time for a fresh approach to the talent crisis. That's because at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing phenomenal HR and people candidates. And guess what? We think we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process. That's because we're not just recruiters. We're strategic partners dedicated to finding HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. So let's break the cycle of frustration together. Partner your talent acquisition strategies with JGA Recruitment and experience the difference in service, excellence, and results. No longer do you need to suffer the costs associated with a poor hire, because with over 100 5-star Google reviews and already trusted by many of the world's leading brands, why don't you take action today? Contact us at jgarecruitment.com to discover how we can help transform your HR and people teams. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, you can sign up for our weekly HR newsletter that's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. Let's revolutionize your HR talent acquisition strategies together and make the war for talent a cry from the past. Visit jjrecruitment.com to find out more.
Okay, thank you. We've got 3 more questions to go through, but I'm conscious we've had this headline staring at people who are watching this for some time. So I'm just going to pause the questions for a moment. Don't worry, we haven't missed them. I just want to move things along ever so slightly, and some of the questions actually relate to some of the topics we've got to come. So let's jump into HMRC government updates and news, because the HMRC scraps plans to classify double cap pickups as cars. The government's name and shame list is going to be revealed, and salary sacrifice implications of the national minimum wage rise. Simon, tell us about the double cab pickups.
Well, I was just thinking, I'm being a bit, I'm a bit cynical minded at times, Nick. Margaret Thatcher, what would her say? The government's not for turning, or this lady's not for turning. Well, on this one, the government has certainly turned, and super quick. So Karen and I will have been known because it's shared with us a press release. And we've been involved in discussions which have it all seems a bit silly to us, doesn't it, Karen? There's an element of, there was a ruling in the courts about what's a car and what's a van. And you do see them. You see them going up and down the roads of these double cab vehicles, and I'm sure that they don't have anything put in the back of them often the time, apart from the family. And because they're a double cab and they've got a pickup back, they've been treated as a van. So the company car taxation is gone, and the van taxation is much more positive. So in fairness to the revenue and the court ruling, they ruled that certain of these were actually company cars, which attract a much bigger. Well, we saw the announcement come out. We've got a good friend who represents the NFU, or the National Farmers Union, that immediately reacted, and within 7 days, the government turned around and cancelled it, realising that all these farmers are driving across fields to collect sheep and whatever other animals, and they quite often have to take workers with them, that actually double cab pickups are actually vans. So they've totally reversed the guidance. But it was very strange because I don't know. Got to sometimes be careful what I say. I'm sure Karen and I have probably been aware of something rumbling for 6 months, and then suddenly we get announcement that from 1st of July, double cab pickups are company cars, and then 7 days later, totally reversed. It's scrapped.
Yeah, and given I have a small holding, and given I live in Cumbria surrounded by farmers and forestry workers and such like, I can confirm that the majority here do not get themselves the great big flashy orange Ford Ranger that you see on the TV at the moment, just to put their family in it and show off. These vehicles are used as utility vehicles. So I was very much a supporter of the NFU in their strive to get this reversed. I do think, as Simon said, there are occasions where they are used as a family car, but I think the decision that HMRC reached was one based on a minority rather than on a majority. And I think that was the biggest issue. So I'm very pleased that they have change that definition, because for those who genuinely use them, including myself with bales of hay and feed and everything else, yes, it's got a back seat, but that's only normally to put something else in it. So it's just what we've got. So I'm pleased with that.
Sounds like common sense has prevailed, which is good to hear. So government's name and shame list. I think Simon, you mentioned earlier, this is quite exhaustive. Let's dive into that.
Yeah, I'm thinking this is probably the largest list they've ever published. But just so you're aware of some of the statistics, and actually my colleague and I that works with me here at SD Works, we're looking at some of this because we're preparing, because there's a significant national minimum wage rise on the 1st of April, that of employers audited for national minimum wage, just under 40% fail. So if HMRC come in and audit, up to 40% are actually failing. And national minimum wage breach, of course, is potentially criminal. So it doesn't come under civil law. It can come under criminal law. So because there is a distinction. Lots of employment law isn't criminal, but national minimum wage failure is potentially, depending on to the degree it gets. So 524 employers failed, and clearly the minister would say breached national minimum wage law. It's interesting, some of the values are low, very low. They may only be a few pounds, but a significant number of them are quite high and amount to thousands of pounds. So there's an element, I guess, of thinking why, and I have to go through some of those. So reductions, deductions, or payments that take pay below minimum wage. So this is where people are not being paid for training, childcare costs, uniform, salary sacrifice schemes features heavily, and we'll come back to elements of salary sacrifice implications. 183 of those 524 failed because they. Can I suggest it? I know I've got to be quite frank at times, Nick, because people don't understand what they're doing to an extent. So sorry if that appears rude to an extent, but I think it's an element of people don't understand salary sacrifice arrangements.
The naivety isn't a defence. It's important that we raise it here. That's what we're here for, right? So
yes, yeah, 160 because they didn't pay for working time. Now, I've seen even in social media recently, they're saying, well, I turn up at this, I've got to change into clean kit, put on my PPE or my food preparation gear, and they don't pay us until we get to our station and the belt starts running. And there's an element of, so you spent 20 minutes getting ready. Well, you're not working. Well, why else are you there? You're not there for the love of it, are you? Or to say goodbye to the kids. You're there preparing for work. Therefore, under national minimum wage law, you are working. And the amount of people I see saying, I've been sent to do a half-hour online course, but they don't pay us. So of those unpaid working time, causes paid to go below the minimum wage, 160 employers out of those. If I go on, failure to pay the correct rate, there's loads of people defined as apprentices, but actually when HMRC investigate the cases, there is no apprenticeship in place. They might be called an apprentice, but they're not lawfully an apprentice. Just because you call someone an apprentice, for example, hairdresser, doesn't mean they are. Do they go to college? Is there a training agreement? What do you do, etc.? So there were 82 employers found to have apprentices that weren't, or were paying the wrong rate. Failure on the 1st of April uplift, so people forgot that the rate goes up on the 1st of April, although it's pay reference period starting on or after. 34 on the accommodation offset. So not now you're getting into obscure areas, but farm workers, estate workers, etc., accommodation offset. 29 for incorrect work type. So quite often we think someone's on an annualized hours or salary, but actually the contract doesn't mention it, or they're doing all sorts of additional time and they're not, they're unmeasured. So they'll be paying outside the pay reference period rules of it has to be paid in the pay reference period or the one following. If it's paid after that, you're too late. Worker status errors, 12, getting low. And then there are 149 other reasons. So sorry, I've gone on a bit there, Nick.
That's all right. Well, obviously, people can find this out themselves. They want to go and see what the reasons are. It's all available in public domain information. I'm going to move on from the shame list for the moment. I know Karen may have had some commentary, but we are getting inundated with questions, which is fantastic. And that's what we're here for. So make sure none of you listening or watching this ends up on that name and shame list, but we're going to try and help you stay compliant. So I want to run through those questions and make sure we've got ample time to do so. Before I do, though, Karen, if you just run us through that last bullet point, salary sacrifice, the implications of the national minimum wage rise. If we cover that off, then I'm going to dive back into the questions. So please do stay patient. I haven't forgotten them. I've tried to acknowledge them all as they come in. So please be patient. We'll come to those in just a moment. Karen, back to you.
Well, it will seem bonkers to many employers, and to be fair, it quite often is. When you're looking at salary sacrifice arrangements, particularly where it's of benefit to the employee, common, of course, is pensions with childcare vouchers now pretty much on their way out, cycle to work schemes and such like. The issue you've got is you cannot be entered into a salary sacrifice arrangement where that would take you below national minimum wage. And if you think about this, national minimum wage is going up and up and up. And therefore, more people will end up, if they are paid at that rate or even sometimes just above, can be taken out. If you don't take them out of salary sacrifice, you will be breaching the rules. The unfairness part is, of course, the employees don't understand why now, where they were in, for example, a pension salary sacrifice arrangement and benefiting, their pension contributions now have to come out of their net pay, and they don't benefit from that now. The employer also doesn't benefit, but I'm not so bothered about that bit, but certainly from an employee perspective. But time and time again, and Simon will vouch for this, the Low Pay Commission, BEIS, or whatever they're called now, the Department for Business and Trade, at the end, they've been challenged every year to allow for voluntary, consensual salary sacrifice that does not impact national wage, and every year they refuse to budge. So this will continue. So please, with the rates going up so high, as a reminder from April, significant increases, you will have to check your workforce and that they are not going to be taken below national wage. And if they are, you will need to advise them that they've been taken out of the salary sacrifice pension scheme and any other scheme.
So because of its importance, Simon, anything you'd like to add before we jump into these questions to that point?
Yeah, sure. And the importance is to consider what you're doing and how you resolve, because what some employers do is continue to provide the benefit and change it. So they flip it to a deduction. But then you've got to consider Regulation 10 of National Minimum Wage Regulations to say, who is the deduction for? Now, for example, in relation to a bike, the employer is lending them a bike for free on the basis that they take a pay cut. Now, if you're going to take money off them, who are they paying? And in that case, they are paying the employer. Well, payments to the employer also reduce national minimum wage pay. So the concept of flipping doesn't necessarily work. So you've got to consider, what is it for? Now, stopping a pension arrangement and changing that on the basis the employee is now contributing may be different, where there's consensual agreement for the change. But if there isn't and you just do it, you may find you fall foul under Regulation 10, deductions for the benefit of the employer, because the employer is doing it to save their skin rather than it being a mutual arrangement. So be careful with some of these implications. The other comment I'd just make, and just a reminder, national living wage age is dropping to 21. So the 21 and 22-year-olds, the rise is even more significant. So there's an element of, do you have the gap between the minimum and what you're actually paying to sacrifice it down? And if that sacrifice down is below, you're potentially committing a crime. And that's, as Karen's saying, the plea often, and we've been at meetings together, haven't we, Karen, where we've kind of saying, but this is for the benefit of the employee, they gain, it's the minister presently so far, and there's probably been about 4 or 5 of them over the years that I can think of, because they change, are not interested. They don't consider there is need to change.
We've had a question here that's come in specifically on this point. We're going to ask it now. It says, as a company, we offer a cycle to work scheme. So how do you avoid benefit discrimination to those on national minimum wage?
Well, I'll answer that if you want. I mean, obviously, employment law and what have you can kick into play here, so I'll put that caveat in. But ultimately, your main leverage is its legislation that's preventing you from doing this. This isn't you as the employer discriminating, even though the legislation does state from HMRC that the benefits should be made available to all. In this case, it's the legislation that says you can't. So that is your reasoning. You're not discriminating because you've chosen to.
That's right. It runs into a level of, if you weren't enough, could you join? You could, therefore you're not discriminated. The fact you don't earn enough isn't the discrimination factor. Now, if it was you're excluded no matter what your earnings level, you group of individuals, that goes into discrimination. Sure. This is where sometimes my sense of humour, Nick, can be a bit flippant. They may say, well, you could give them a bell. Isn't that cycling safety equipment?
Very good. Took me a second. Very good.
All right.
Okay, so I've got a question here, and I'm going to ask these two because they're relevant to the topic. Should I include shift pay in national minimum wage calculations, Karen?
Everything's included in national minimum wage calculations as earnings. But as Simon pointed out before, some things that you might do may not be. But shift pay is earnings. So again, as long as that shift pay is for those hours shifts worked, because I think that's the crucial part, is you should be paying for what people work or perceive to work, even, travel time, things like that. I've come across employers where, because people have been asked to travel and, they've done it in their own time, that doesn't count as working, but it is working if they're traveling for something to do with work. And when HMRC do a compliance visit, they don't just look at your payroll records. And I think this is an important point to make. It's not just payroll. They will look at time and attendance. They will look at timesheets. They will ask employees. And, they will do that.
And I think Karen may have misunderstood the original question there, but she's quite right. I think what Karen's saying is all time, whether paid or unpaid, counts as time worked. But does the shift premium count as national minimum wage earnings? And the answer is no, only the base payment. And that's the same with overtime. So if you work an hour's extra overtime, that hour counts as work time for minimum wage purposes. And the base part of overtime pay counts as national minimum wage earnings. But the premium doesn't, the half and the time. That's what you meant, isn't it, Karen? I'm sure.
Yes, it is. Sorry. I was thinking the actual earnings that you're getting paid for because you're a shift worker. Yes. Yeah. So that's fine.
And back to the salary sacrifice side of things, if the company make good the shortfall in national minimum wage, can we continue with salary sacrifice?
Yes. Potentially, if you're increasing the pay back up to national minimum wage levels, you can, or even suspending is potentials. Got to be careful when, though. You can't redo that from someone on maternity leave because that would be considered discrimination. But for non-maternity cases, could you extend the length of arrangements potentially?
I would agree with that.
So let's jump into the next slide. I'm not going to ask these questions. I'm just going to change the view slightly for our audience while I jump into the next round of questions. A lot of them are linked to payrolling benefits anyway. We've had a couple of observational points as well from the lovely and well-versed Ashley Dorman, who likes joining us on the show. He's just said that going back to your pensions response, Simon, there is the risk of going over the pensions annual allowance, he confirms. The answer needs to also consider the pension annual allowance, as that can give rise to an additional tax liability for the employee. So that obviously links to the pensions question earlier on.
Yes, although there's been relaxations on the pension allowance and it doesn't apply. So there are changes in pension allowances and it depends on circumstances. You're correct.
Sure.
In relation to the 1 million whatever value. So I think it's worth looking at. But there have been changes on that, and we've had more proposals come out, haven't we, Karen, on the removal of the annual allowance? Because some of those, also pension allowances, because some of that has gone.
Well, I think it's an advertisement to get the any pensions questions, save them up for next week. We've got Andy back and we can run through those in detail. A question here relating to DEA and salary sacrifice benefits, i.e. childcare vouchers in this instance. Does the DEA amount get calculated on the gross pay before the salary sacrifice or afterwards? We asked DWP and they didn't know how to answer this question. Wondering if you or anyone else has come across this before.
Yeah, salary sacrifice is a contractual reduction in pay, so it's never been turned. So the DEA doesn't apply to the sacrifice.
Great. Well, that was an easy answer. Okay. Fantastic. What we like. A few more to get through yet, so that speeds us on.
Last one. Yeah.
Because it's national insurance earnings and they're not there because you've not paid them.
Well, for weekly payrolls, how should tax years with a week 53 be handling when payrolling a benefit?
In the same way as anything else. So you tax it on the appropriate week 53. So the benefit is treated as if it's taxable income. However, you will have had that marked if you're in your payroll solution. It certainly does it in the SD Works. Hopefully, if you're not using SD Works, it does in yours, because there is a 50% regulatory limit and you don't want universal credits to be impacted. So there's a special RTI FPS field which returns the value. The standard tax calculation is applied, which generally on a week 53 is a week 1 month 1 basis of the allowance. People will get more allowance than they're entitled to for the year. So quite often 53s don't notice it so much, but the week 56s do. They will get a P800 bill because although the regulations require the employer to give 4 weeks of personal tax-free allowance in the week 56, they're not entitled to it. It's a strange. It's something again. It's something we've debated for. I'm thinking 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years, 20 years. There are actually discussions and thoughts of changing it at some point, but they don't seem to go very far, do they, Karen? We never seem to get a resolution.
Because if you remember, the OTS did look at proposing in their last report of whether we change the tax year. Now, if you change the tax year, then that would be the time that you would look to remove a 53 or a 56 potentially. But yeah, so no, nothing. It's been debated for as long as I would say I've been in payroll. But certainly since the RTI implementation.
Yeah. So the periodic free pay is based on it's a 52 or 12-month year. I think there's been considerations of thinking if you're going to have a 56, divide the free pay by 56 and apply it in 4 week worth and etc. And that would come roughly to the right amount. But PAYE is really a guess. PA. You often hear an employee say, "Well, you've corrected the wrong amount of tax. Why have I got this interaction?" Tax is a personal matter. PAYE is a guess estimate basis of taxation. Doesn't deal with the personal affairs of an individual.
Okay, cool. Ashley's just commented saying I was referring to the annual allowance, not the lifetime allowance. Thank you for that, Ashley, which is cool. Okay, so next question. We are having issues where HMRC has not been allocating PAYE payments to the correct accounts, even though it's been stated on the payment reference. For the last couple or so months, they have been sending us letters to say we have been underpaying one account, and when we look at the dashboard, we can see the funds allocated to the wrong accounts. How do we start correcting this misallocations with the HMRC? Karen?
I'm actually going to go with Simon on this one, simply because I just shake my head. This is unfortunately a frequent occurrence. We never really get to the bottom of why it happens. So if the right reference is used and the payments are timed accordingly, because I think it's important to remember, don't forget, we do stuff in real time. HMRC does not. There's certain points when that dashboard gets updated. So depending on when you've submitted the payment, and the computer decides which one that is for, depending on when you submit it. So you can call, having done it, HMRC's employer helpline, and they will actually move it while you're on the phone if you get a very helpful HMRC person on the assumption you've got through. And one of the common things, though, is you might be told to submit an EYU or another FPS to do it. Please, please, please don't do it. Don't do it. Don't, because you will make it even worse. So, Simon, I don't know if you've got something to add. We phone up HMRC, finally get through and get them to just shift it about. It is a pain.
That's kind of the best forms. I mean, to give the person who's asked the question some reassurance here, this is not the first time I've asked this question to the panel, but I'm going to come back to you, Simon.
Well, I was going to say, really? HMRC have done that wrong? How could they? It never happens. Unfortunately, Karen and I know it's more frequent than we know. And I'm going to say apologies to our audience here, because sometimes when Karen and I get these sorts of queries, we can be a bit flippant of it. I don't think intentionally, or a bit. It's about like turning up at accident and emergency, and you've got something wrong with you, and the nurses are quite busily talking about their badminton match tonight, and you're feeling "save my life," but they know you're not going to die, is the reality. And they're professional about their job. Sometimes there's an element of, some people will come to us and say, this has happened, we need to get this solved by the end of the week. And Karen and I know that generally it won't be. But we do know how to help. And generally it's contact HMRC. They may shift the amounts, or you need to raise a charge resolution case. Now, often the respondent at the other end will tell you, if you do raise a charge resolution case, it may be 3 years before it's resolved. That's the sort of language they type of use. So you think, okay, I won't because it's going to take so long. If you don't, it'll take longer, because nothing is started. So, and often, and Karen will know because she's probably seen some of my correspondence with HMRC, is I'm very terse with them about letters that refer to earlier year updates and how to apply them, especially when they relate to in-year, current year corrections, or even because earlier year updates ended in April 2020. They don't exist. Why HMRC letters still refer to them, I've got no idea. I think I must have made that point about at least 10 times this year through official channels, although we did get some assurance some weeks ago that they would stop it. But if you phone up, they'll still refer to EYU. They don't exist. No, they don't at all. All right, and you're right. They may say do another FPS. Another FPS will make it worse, because duplications will triplicate or quadruplicate. They won't remove a duplicate. They can't, only HMRC. So it's a charge resolution case. Sometimes the accounts office will transfer values if it's obvious to them. But don't panic. I think it's
Don't panic, Mr. Mannering.
Payroll. Yeah, it's trust your payroll reconciliations and pay what's due. The other thing that sometimes employers do is they pay it because to get the HMRC off their back. If you pay it, HMRC haven't got anything to fix, and you've admitted their record is correct. Am I fair in saying that, Karen, do you think?
I would say, because I was going to say as well, on a positive note, there are occasions where you say it can take years, that it sorts itself out. So if you've, genuinely, if you're not successful in getting through to the employer's helpline, which can be difficult at times, other times, it's very good, is that actually if you go back into a client account, you think, oh, it's fixed itself. So sometimes it is just about the timing. So even though your reference is right, if you've submitted it, say in the same month, the same period, or in the wrong period for the automation routines, it can go, and then somehow or another, I'm not a techie for HMRC's computer systems, you go in and you think, oh, I must phone HMRC to correct that, and you think, oh, it's sorted. So
conscious of time. Sorry to Karen, just to cut off at the end there. I think with that question we've probably covered. I'm aware we've got 3 more questions left to go through, and we've got this Pairing Benefits Foundation I want to run through so people know what they need to do now, which I think is incredibly important. So let's quickly whiz through these questions. Please do keep asking them as we go. Next one comes in from Gabrielle. It says, we have not submitted P11Ds for employees for our health benefits of around 132 a year per employee. This carried on for a number of years in error as the benefit was treated as trivial. How to make it right with HMRC as a company without involving the employees affected?
Well, there's a couple of options. You could potentially meet the liability yourself, but if you do, you'll gross up, and it will be a significant expense to the employer because when you meet the pecuniary liability, that's a taxable benefit in itself. So it's circular, as we talked about earlier, but the amount doesn't seem high. So there's an element of correct your underreporting, and personally, I'd said let HMRC catch up with it because they don't seem large amounts. So if was it £130? Did you say?
132. It may, of course, depend on how many employees that is, but
no, it'd be 20% of that. So they'd only get a £26 liability for each of those years. They'd code it out. So if it was much higher, then that's much more of an impact. But there is an element of get the reporting in order, or occasionally, if you are able to contact and speak with an HMRC person that's helpful, they may come to an agreement. But I'm not sure how common those are, and it's whether you're a size of employer where they would want to engage with that.
Sure.
I mean, this is one of those occasions where you might want to seek tax advice, because one of the other options, of course, is to do, depending on the monies, a voluntary disclosure, which just sort of says, oops, we've made a mistake, but we're going to fix it. And then it gives you a little bit of time to think about the right options to do.
Puts you in the system. Great. So if you operate a salary sacrifice scheme and an employee goes on to SSP only, the employee has previously increased their pension to 50% of salary. Does the employer need to maintain the 50% pension contribution on their behalf as they can't pay via salary sacrifice? And does this still continue once SSP expires and they are in no pay?
Well, my initial thought, Karen may have a different view, is the maternity protections are there. For sickness, there aren't any. So stop it.
Yeah, that would be my view. Maternity is very different. The sick pay is, to my knowledge, there is nothing that would protect there.
Great. Good. Hope that helps you, Rachel, with that question. Okay. Last question for now. If an employee is overpaid and agrees to repayment per month, if that deduction takes them below national minimum wage, is that okay because they have agreed it and because they shouldn't have had the money in the first place?
Yes, under Regulation 10 of National Minimum Wage Regulations, an overpayment recovery does not reduce national minimum wage rates. So you've actually paid above national minimum wage rates. If you exclude that deduction amount, that's the value that we looked at. So an NMW audit wouldn't look at that overpayment recovery. They'd look at any other deductions. So you've not underpaid.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fabulous. Right, let's jump into this slide that's been staring everyone else in the face, and we're ready to make everyone ready for what's to come. So employment, flexible working and payrolling benefits. New employment and flexible working rights are coming in from April. This is what you need to think about now to make sure you are ready. Simon, I'm going to come back to you for this one.
Okay, and I'll do an element of this from memory, although I've tried an article about it the other week, published it, Nick, which is why it will be probably here and Karen will be aware. But there are employment law changes which are applicable from 1st of April, just to make you aware. But there will be a day one right for an employee to request flexible working. So you may even have someone at interview who says, yes, they're available and willing to work 5 days a week, etc. No, they understand, etc. No problem. I can do all that time. And they turn up on their first day and said, oh, by the way, I have some commitments. They don't even have to explain what the commitments are these days. It doesn't have to be family, related or anything. Anybody can ask. And they say, I want to do a 2-day week. And that would be an immediate day one right. However, that doesn't give them a right to 2-day week. And the employer would then have to consider that request and respond within 2 months. Whereas at the moment, those types of requests, potentially you need reason. The employer can consider it for 3 months. That's reduced down to 2. And you have to have a service level. You've got to work for them for a period of time. Now it's a day one right. The employer has to respond within 2 months. And if they're going to deny it, enter a consultation with the employee, giving the reasons as why. So it now becomes more of a employer justification rather than employee justification for flexible working. I think I've got that right, Karen, unless you remember anything else, but I think that's
nothing to add to that.
Great. Perfect. We've got a little question. Just another one's popped in. I'm loving the interaction. So thank you, everyone who's attending this webinar and putting them in the question box. You keep me on my toes. Would child maintenance deductions and DWP and DEA orders affect minimum wage?
No. Apart from if the employer is applying the employer charge of £1, because that's a payment to the employer that would reduce NMW earnings. But the application of the AEO or DA or DEO or whatever earnings arrestment itself does not reduce national minimum wage earnings.
Okay, fab. So we're ready to move on then into the world of RPA, AI, GDPR and security. If we are, let's have the next slide. We've got one more poll I want to try and get to before we close the show. I'm going to mention to everyone, we may not get through the reflections piece, but that's a section I think we can save for another day anyway. I do want to get through to the SD Works Academy dates, so we get through to those before the next show. So we're going to run in now to RPA and AI, jump into a poll, finish off with the Academy, and we should be good to go. So RPA and AI is...
Sorry, Nick, the other aspect on that last slide, which just needs a reminder, is the announcement that mandation of payrolling is April 26. And I guess our plea there is if you're wanting to go payrolling, you need to go early. Your cut-off registration date is the 5th of April 2024. So don't come to your payroll supplier mid-April and say, we'd like to do that for the end of April. You'll be too late. Sorry. So right, RPA and AI is the future of payroll automation. Now, we could talk about this probably for 2 hours on itself. It's certainly a podcast content savvy kind of question here. But I think there's something we need to consider, which is in particular in relation to the security risks, where payroll data is being stored. We spend a lot of time on this panel and other shows talking about the compliance element of payroll, but we have to also remind ourselves that it's a point of attack for those that want access to data. We're talking about how we can leverage data better to make it more strategic as a function, but we've got to make sure that data is absolutely protected as well. Of course, SD Works are doing a lot of work in this field to automate processes, improve efficiency, and of course, make sure everything is secure and stable. So Simon, wondered if you could take the floor on RPA, AI, and the future of payroll. Is it automated? Well, some aspects, Nick, I won't claim to be the specialist in. However, we do heavily use robotics in our processing for certain clients. That'll be fairly secured down to that client. area, and that's potentially to do repetitive activity, which normally would be undertaken by a human, which doesn't require a lot of decision making, etc. So handling hundreds of thousands of data items that work in a certain way, the robotics will know and deal with that. And also we're implementing artificial intelligence in relation to elements, and there are elements of it that are a bit scary, Nick. So you can actually, for example, if you had an article to write for a magazine, go to the AI tools and say, can you write me an article subject on this, that, and the other? I want to cover these points. And it'll return within, 30 seconds, a written article with references and things. And so there's almost an element of, actually, I don't have to write articles anymore. Now, whether AI it covers the sort of slightly cynical Yorkshire humour, black humour of Simon Parsons in it, is a different matter. But the scary thing about artificial intelligence is actually next week it might reflect the style and thought process of Simon, which is scary at times. So it's increasingly becoming an element of actually it's thinking more how I think, but better and quicker. And how do I deny it's me? So there's that aspect. But as robotics is a tool for handling masses of data, which is repetitive and brain numbing, and keep that accuracy, absolutely brilliant. But the thought that it can actually start thinking and making decisions in a way that you would normally, and then does it all the time, that just seems a bit scary.
I think there's a contextualization piece here. I'll use an example of payroll here in the world of recruitment. If you were to give a vacancy to all agencies in the UK, irrespective of where they specialized, they would act effectively like the human equivalent of what AI would do. They would go out to the CV sites, LinkedIn, whatever else, and they would search for the word payroll. Now, we all know the results they would bring back would be significantly different to actually what's suitable. You'll find people working in bars that have done their payroll for 3 employees, which actually isn't payroll at all. They're not processing, not looking at compliance. We'll find a whole swathe of different individuals coming through. It's not to say that they haven't done their, there's a lack of understanding or contextualization of what that means in order to get good results. And I think you'll find the same using these programs. You can find that it writes things very quickly for you, but unless you are an expert in prompting, which is a job in itself, you're going to get back typically generalistic reports that may not be specific in nature or actually answer the question you really want answered unless you've fully prompted it and contextualized it effectively. So the ability for me to write a search for a payroll professional using ChatGPT would be significantly different in prompting than it would be from someone who has no expertise in that sector or that niche. So I think that there's caution with all of these things. I think you'd agree, Simon, and it's how we use it, how we prompt it, and making sure if we are using those kind of language tools in particular, that we are checking the content that comes back. I agree it's advancing in tonality and style, but I think there's an awful lot way to go yet from a language side of things. Anyway, I know that there's for the first time ever, I don't know if you've seen this, Karen and Simon, at the Payroll Congress coming up in Nashville in America. They're having a whole C-suite conversation about the role of, or the transformative role of artificial intelligence in reshaping the payroll sector. I will be in attendance for that. So maybe post that conference in May, I will have a little bit more insight into how AI is going to be used as a strategic and analytical powerhouse to raise the profile of payroll globally, because I know a lot of the people on that panel are utilizing it already to help give them a competitive edge in what is never changing sort of payroll landscape. So I will try and feedback post that session. It's definitely a hot topic at the moment. But Karen, from your perspective, we've got a bullet point here of saying how relevant, a slightly different topic now, a bit of a segue out, but how relevant is GDPR now? Now you're managing multiple payrolls, and GDPR is obviously a very, very central and important part of what you have to do with the way that you manage your information. And yet it's not something, certainly in my world, that we're hearing now a lot about these days. There was a lot of, rush to get things right. We had payroll question time after payroll question time back in the day about helping people get it right. Doesn't seem to be in something that's discussed as much as it maybe should be, or how important is it now? And what's your experience with GDPR? What's its relevancy now?
for me personally, and indeed with a team of people, GDPR is absolutely still at the top. It's still, I would say, one of my top 3 scariest risks, because when it happens, it could be severe. So the importance there. But just linking back with the AI and everything else, GDPR, that's the bit, because robotics and what have you can be much, much faster than a human being. And one scenario genuinely that I came across was looking at how robotics or AI and what I can do is that part of the process was done by the bot, but when the human went to do the next bit, the bot had done something in advance. So it meant what the human was getting, had it been sent, could have been a GDPR breach, because they weren't sending, the bot had put stuff into files, into places, and then the human was retrieving and about to send to a client, but it was the wrong thing. So GDPR is still very, very relevant as a topic. It's still a big risk, but I would then link it back to, as we're looking at robotics, AI, is the role that it's going to play with the human, because there's a place for it and a place for the human, is to make sure that those two align, to make sure that the bot is, if the bot's going to do it, where does that human fit in from that perspective?
I think there's a reminder here as well.
Scenario.
A lot of people are still just coming to grips with this technology now, starting to find their first searches, or they're starting to have a look. Remember, this is open source software. So I have to be very clear with my own employees that if they were to pick up, for example, a candidate resume and put it into ChatGPT, it's accessible elsewhere. You're immediately breaching with personal data, all the GDPR regulations by putting something in a public platform. Now, yes, you can remove it, and I think it takes 60 days now for them to remove something, a conversation, if you delete it, but it's open source. So you've got to be very, very careful that it's not just you that potentially has visibility about what the searches you are putting into those language platforms. And I think people forget, they think it's a secret. I'm going to write this article, everyone's going to think I've written it, whoopsie-doo. But other people can access that open source search, and they can access what you put in, and they can do all different things. And they're very, very intelligent and bright people accessing, and checking what people are doing. And a lot of people are scared to have Alexa in their house and things like that these days. But you need to have the same level of awareness, I think, that when we're using these tools, they are open source tools. So just be, keep your wits about you if you are putting any kind of personal data, any security-based data, passwords, anything like that into these things, because you're leaving yourself open to problems, I would say. Simon, I saw you nodding. Anything you want to add before we jump into the SD Works Academy?
Not really a lot. Just we went to a session once some years ago about the security risks, of course, because you can have public code there for devices. So if you want to find out someone's Wi-Fi password, if they've got a kettle that interacts with the Wi-Fi, you only have to pass it a code, and it'll pass you back the password.
Amazing, yeah, and I always think when there's software that's more, that comes across like it's more intelligent than you, there's other people more intelligent than the software, looking at that and utilizing in ways we just don't want to imagine, right? So just be very, very careful. I think in the world of payroll, with the amount of data that we're utilizing to make it more strategic, to really build its reputation, it also could be our undoing. So just be very, very mindful. As I say, with great power comes great responsibility, and we've got to be very mindful about how we're using the data that we're storing. And we're seeing more and more security breaches, and we've seen some very high-profile payroll businesses and solutions companies hit by ransomware attacks and things like that as well. So, just be very, very mindful. I'm conscious of time. I don't want people to miss the opportunity to sign up for the SD Works Academy because some of these sessions take place before our next payroll question time. So our next PQT, you can sign up now, I believe, is on the 28th of March. But prior to that, David, if we can jump through a couple of slides, I'm going to run the poll as well. But I'm going to just give the dates of the SD Academy first. So we've got the 4th of March, which is building a positive culture. 6th of March, performance management, in-depth workshop. 15th of March there, the National Minimum Wage Advanced Course. Diversity and inclusion on the 18th of March. Payroll Part 1 on the 19th of March. 20th of March is conflict resolution in depth, and Payroll Part 2. And holiday pay on the 22nd. You can sign up for all of those courses at the SD Works site. So go to sdworks.co.uk and look for the Academy calendar, and you can sign up for all of those. And please do so if you have any interest in any of those subjects. And while I still have the panel, we've got 2 minutes left, and I want to run into the poll. So we're going to say, will you be implementing RPA and AI processes in your payroll operations? Yes, we already are, possibly, but no solid plans yet. And no, we're avoiding it right now. While we're getting those results, Jackie says she's going to put the kettle on. She wants to find out someone's Wi-Fi password, Simon. And I wondered if you could just give us a bit of an update on the Academy while waiting for those results to come in. And Karen, once we've got those results, if you can just finish with the commentary, and we should be good to finish today's session. So Simon, tell us about the Academy, what we can expect from some of those courses.
Yeah, sure. Again, they're covering quite detailed areas, especially on national minimum wage coming up, etc. If you're wanting to advance your professional development, feel free to join or sign up to the Academy. It's relatively new. Our Academy launched in the UK back in February last year, so it's coming up for a year old. And we've got some good trainers, partners that are doing, if you've got new people who've joined Payroll, the Payroll 1 and 2 or Payroll Complete course goes through income tax, national insurance, attachment of earnings orders, starters, leavers, statutory payments, all those sorts of things to spread the knowledge and build up the profession. And some of you will be SDWorks users. The courses aren't all geared to just SDWorks. They're general knowledge because we're experts within Europe on the operation of payroll and employment law. So come and join us and have a look.
Come join, and you'll get a chance to see Simon again in all of his glory on those panels as well, I'm sure. So let's have a look at these results then. Will you be implementing RPA or AI process in your payroll operation? Those results are as follows. Yes, actually probably still a bit less than I anticipated here. 3% yes, we already are. 40% possibly, but no plans yet. 50% no, we're avoiding it right now. I'm slightly surprised by those results. Karen, what are your thoughts?
I must admit, I feel a conflict of interest here because I am really excited about what RPA and AI can do for us. I accept that there are, we've got to be cautious and everything we've just said, but I'm very surprised that 57% are avoiding it. And I suppose, and I'm not being flippant, genuinely, I do think that society and the way things are going is that we won't be able to avoid it. It is going to be part of what we do. Yes, we need to manage it carefully. All of those things, absolutely. But I think for those perhaps who are avoiding it and maybe no solid plans yet even as well, at least start having a look as to what this means. I know that when you refer to Alexa, it surprises me what she knows and what ads appear on my phone and everything else. But I'm thinking, actually, that saves me searching for something. But I do get that we have to be cautious as well. And I know the government are obviously clearly looking at this. But I would start to have a look at it. It's actually a bit more, I'm not a techie like Simon. And I'm quite excited by it. You might be surprised if you start to have a look into it.
Well, let's jump back to the last slide then for the final session, which is going to be on the 28th of March. And I'll make this pledge. Karen, I completely agree, by the way. Why don't we go back to this topic for those that are still online with us now? Come back and join us in the May edition. That'll be post the seminar that I'll be attending in the States. That'll give Simon a chance to really get to grips with the way that companies like SDWorks are leveraging AI. And Karen, how you plan to leverage it as well and things like that for that session. Let's have a really good deep dive into how we can use AI and embrace it in ways that can really benefit a payroll operation, and think about things that perhaps people haven't considered in the past, to know how we can really start to utilize the benefits of it, as well as keep our awareness of the security concerns as well. I think that'd be a really interesting episode. So we'll save that one for the end of May, if that's okay. I know there's one topic we haven't got to today. We'll try and address that in the next section. Next time we meet you on the 28th of March. A couple of comments have come in. Thanks, guys. Great session as always from Emir. Really good informative session. Looking forward to joining more, as they are all very interesting topics. Thank you, Jackie, for your feedback as well. Thank you, Karen Thomson, for joining us today. Thank you, Simon Parsons. My name is Nick Day. Thank you for joining us once more for Payroll Question Time. And I cannot wait to join you all again on the 28th of March. See you all soon.